I got worse. Hi everyone! This year I read 46 books, 48 depending on how you count it. Last year I said I'd read a book a week. That's not what happened this year. I feel like each year I read a little bit less, which is kind of fine. I still read plenty. A couple friends asked me this year how I'm able to read so much. In order to actually get like a good vibe for reading, find a comfy chair near natural lighting. I have back problems, so a big chair where I can shift position on a regular basis. I also like to do it in a semi-open space, like a living room. Basically having a semi-social space allows you to take natural breaks as people decide to like distract you with YouTube videos, or you want to actually talk about what you're reading. And of course, it all depends on your distractibility level. That's just generally how I feel comfortable when I'm reading. I graduated, finally, and immediately after I stopped reading. Okay, I stopped reading books for like a month. I actually did feel like I needed a bit of a break over the summer from not just reading, but also activism. I left college having done some of the best organizing work that I've ever done and that I'm most proud of. A lot of this was using the student union at UVM to organize a front and a message no longer accepting sexual assault at the university. All of this is in tandem with the neoliberalization of education that creates these problems. The fight for dignity in education continues. I did miss Striketober. I was in Barcelona for about 3 months and I kept hearing about all these strikes that were going on in the States and I was so jealous. Behold, a grotesque shrine to the fact that I spent more time this year reading about my ideals than putting them into practice. While it does seem like compared to 2020, the worldwide struggle has kind of abated. We've come to accept our new glorified coat hanger president, Lord Byron. Bing bong. If 2019 represented struggle against austerity, 2020 represented the black struggle and social justice issues coming back to the front, and 2021 represents an ascendant labor militancy, and you can combine all of this in some newfound political edge, I think we could actually really change some shit. Because what, we're 2 years into COVID, we can't see our families during the holidays, and the fucking fire just like tore out a chunk of Colorado in an afternoon, and this new president isn't doing anything. Something needs to happen. Right now, I'm back at home after Barcelona for a little bit and then I'll go back to France. But I will be helping out with a couple new organizations that I think are really rad. And a candidate that I'm really excited about, Anas Kazib. He's part of the organization Révolution Permanente that kept the pension strike going during the holidays a couple years back. Really fucking rad shit. Visiting France and getting connected with Révolution Permanente was such a breath of fresh air. It's so great when you connect with a group of people whose task and energy is just so magnetic. I'm so excited to throw myself into a project that has a clear program, a clear strategy, and a world to win.
This past summer,
I did spend a lot of time here in basically my childhood house, and I was mostly focused on working around the house, including filling up those bookshelves that I was telling you about last year. However, I was able to continue a sort of like weekly radical movie night with a really great group of friends. For those of you who know me and assume that I just watched Bo Burnham's Inside like a dozen times, I didn't. I watched it 9 times. The rest of the time I was busy. I rewatched a few movies: Judas and the Black Messiah, The Young Karl Marx, Marx in Soho, Blind Spotting, La Haine, Pride, Marxist feminist classic Chicken Run. And then some of the new stuff I watched was Captain Fantastic, People Speak, 9 to 5, Harlan County, USA. A great movie that got me really excited to go to Catalonia was Land and Freedom by Ken Loach. I watched The Battle of Algiers, and that's a fucking great movie. It's not a documentary, and yet I felt like I basically witnessed an aspect, at least, of the Algerian Revolution. I also watched Norma Ray. I love that movie, and it definitely made me want to get my union job back, because the union character in the movie, he's just so cool, and I just want to be that guy so bad. Anyway, on to books! What the fuck did I read in 2021? I reread 2 books. I reread The Prophet by Khalil Gibran in French, Le Prophète de Khalil Gibran? Khalil? And I reread The Hobbit. I must have read that back in elementary school. You'll notice that I really didn't read as much fiction this year, and it's kind of because I got a bit tired of it. I know this will have me basically branded a sociopath, but I've just recently been far more interested in getting like a handle on just what's going on around me. The world is enough right now. But I did end up reading some fiction, some... Am I gonna do the bit? I'm gonna do the bit.
Adult fiction.
4 videos strong, baby. I only read 2 plays, Dutchman and The Slave by Leroy Jones. I read a man called Ova, which I thought was really sweet. I read it for a friend. It's basically like, you know Gran Torino? It's basically Gran Torino if it wasn't an absolute reactionary piece of garbage. It's like a Swedish Gran Torino. God, I fucking hate that movie. I read a bit of Nella Larson. I liked Quicksand a lot, and I'm not sure if the strength of it comes from the fact that it's semi-autobiographical, but I thought its Sisyphean thematics were really good and kind of horrifying. Of the Lord of the Rings books, my favorite I think was The Two Towers. I especially like the second half, one of the most fucking awesome ending scenes I've ever read. Oh, it's so good. Moving on to nonfiction. Read a few interesting books. I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. A good friend of mine gifted Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad, which despite its sort of individualist approach was still a helpful tool. Read No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. Being in Nothingness, I felt so proud when I finally got to the end. I'd been trying to really understand what Sartre is saying while also trying to critique it as I go along. Because even though I have a background in philosophy, I still have a lot of trouble with really rigorous systematic thinking. A friend of mine suggested I read Summerhill, A Radical Approach to Child Rearing by A.S. Neal. This book is kind of responsible for popularizing the free school concept. Deeply anti-authoritarian, a lot of social critique. You internalize so many ideas about how to be around children and what children are like, and some of the time you're reading it, it makes you uncomfortable. And it'll give you a lot of interesting clues into what you've internalized from a deeply oppressive society. And that's it. No other books did I read. Oh yeah, except for all this shit. As kind of a graduation present for myself, I bought a bunch of revolutionary socialist lit that I've been really meaning to read. And so that's actually ended up being kind of the majority of my reading for this year, which I'm psyched on. Let's get into it. For graphic novels, I read Che, A Graphic Biography, which was great. And I read Tariq Ali's Leon Trotsky, An Illustrated Introduction. I read a few anthologies, including Luxembourg, Socialism or Barbarism, Finished Irish Liberation, Palestine, A Socialist Introduction. Great way to sort of position the stakes of what I guess is a debate when it really shouldn't be. Revolutionary Rehearsals, put together by Colin Barker. It's full of really great assessments of a few different historical periods internationally, all of course from the Trotskyist perspective, really beautifully, critically appraised. The Iranian Revolution, Chile 1973, May 68 in France, and the Carnation Revolution in Portugal.
Oh yeah, how could I have forgotten about the Polish Solidarność movement occurring primarily between 1980 to 1981?
And continuing on the Trotskyist lit, I read Trotsky, Writings in Exile. There's no substitute for reading Trotsky in his own words. Trotskyism remains the revolutionary tradition in which I feel most comfortable, but one in which I also feel I need to break out of a little bit and really explore the Marxist-Leninist perspective as well. I was reading it with my friend. His parents are old guard Stalinists. We're just reading this, just going like, oh, fuck you, Stalin. Understanding the sort of betrayals to the Marxist tradition really clarified my understanding of Trotskyism itself. And I think his theory of permanent revolution finally clicked in reading this. In terms of historical pieces, I read Howard Zinn's A Young People's History to the United States, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism by Kristen Godsey, appraising the legacy of women's rights across the Iron Curtain. In a lot of cases, quality of life for women was actually far higher, despite the narrative that we're usually fed about the Soviet Union, about Eastern Europe, whatever you think of whether these states were actually socialist or not. It's a great sort of case study. Despite being a sort of sociological piece, it's very fun and very engaging. A friend of mine bought me a copy of The Black Jacobins, which was awesome. I tend to not remember everything I read when I read history. There's just so much there, but you can see in this struggle the brutality, the hard sort of political realism national liberation struggles have to really face. C.L.R. James is so passionate about the subject and it really comes through. And revolution for him is messy, but it's necessary. And it is not one until the ruling classes are running for their lives. I think my favorite works were An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, which really drove home the sort of grandeur, the vastness, the dignity of these nations that were destroyed. And while it doesn't point forward very often, it at least grounds us in a perspective that is alive and breathing, and it emphasizes that. Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. Didn't expect this to be such a sort of economic work on top of being a historical work, and that was so necessary to get at what's going on in terms of the sort of resource extraction by the global north, the mines, the plantations, the latifundias. It's a very dense work, but it's very enriching. In terms of sort of philosophy, theory-esque type works, I read On the Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State by Friedrich Engels. Read Pedagogy of the Oppressed around the same time that I was reading Summerhill. Although while I love his writing style, which is immensely accessible while remaining deeply theoretical, I'm still figuring out exactly how I can apply it to my approach to teaching. How do I remain a revolutionary in the classroom. Stilted social environments that are deeply unnatural, basically operating in service of the social reproduction of the system that we want to fight. Paulo Freire is great at bringing this contradiction up, though I think I still need to basically find out my own answers. And of course, I finally got around to reading Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. It's interesting to read this text that basically gives birth to post-colonial studies, that popularizes the third worldist perspective, and of course his writings on reclaiming the dignity of yourself in the face of the violence of the oppressor is so crucial and such an unapologetic intervention on the sort of liberal pacifist notion of how revolutions should go. And I especially thought Jean-Paul Sartre's intro was particularly stirring. And it was very well paired, of course, with having watched the Battle of Algiers, as Frantz Fanon was actually a revolutionary in the Algerian War. In terms of more concrete, more political writing, Angela Davis's Are Prisons Obsolete? Good to finally read a proper abolitionist book. The Red Deal, continuing on indigenous struggle. Rebel Cities by David Harvey was really interesting. His questions about the city as a site of struggle, as well as understanding the way that the geography of cities is inherently a product of the need to offload capital, the needs of consumption within the city that create deeply oppressive, homogenizing cityscapes that are increasingly commodified and attack the sort of commons that are naturally created when you bring in so densely a labor supply. And of course, this is all historical too. And I really liked Revolting Prostitutes, which not only gives you a sense of the scope of sex work organizing across the world, but while doing it combats the different anti-sex work legal frameworks that often harm the very community that it seeks to protect as a sort of patronizing savior, if not an outright oppressor. I have been involved in sex work organizing and yet haven't really read any extended works on it, despite my obvious solidarity for sex workers and the rights of sex work as an inherent labor right. And of course, I read a little bit of political economy. I read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism by V.I. Lenin. Good to see that sort of more economic side of Lenin, even if it was a bit dry, I'll say. And of course, I finally read Marx's Capital Volume 1. Oh, I feel like this is just such a huge accomplishment. It's so long and it's such a sort of rite of passage if you're really gonna like just be that kind of armchair Marxist. But I fucking did it and I learned so much. If you're really willing to really study this, it's so important. As my comrades in France would say, c'est la base. Now that I have all these tools, I really want to figure out ways to use them. But of course, I really couldn't have done it alone, like at all. Obviously, I had to have conversations with friends about it while I was reading, but happily I wasn't totally on my own. I had Joseph Chunara's A Reader's Guide to Marx's Capital. Great study guide for it, very straightforward, and critically engages also with the standard companion text, which is the other book I read for this, a companion to Marx's Capital by David Harvey. I actually read David Harvey's companion a couple months after having finished it. It was nice to refresh my reading and to have a sort of narrative analysis of what Marx is doing across the work. Absolutely fucking psyched that I actually got through this. Very thankful that there are other resources to help you get through this. I don't expect everyone else to actually go out and fucking read this book. It's massive, it's huge, it's dense, it's theory, but it's also super rewarding once you get to the end and once you really internalize a lot of it. And of course, there's always more stuff to learn, so I won't close the chapter on that. There are other guides and interpretations of it that I look forward to reading in the future, including an illustrated version of it, which I'm pretty excited about. All right, that wraps up the very dense Marxist shit that I was reading. There's still a few other books that I read. I read some collections of Khalil Gibran's poetry. I can't express to you how much glee I got from Fuck That and Honest Meditation by Jason Headley. It's a delight. And a really great friend of mine also suggested I read The Chronology of Water by Lydia Yuknovich. So anyway, that's it. That's what I read this year. As for what's next, a family friend of mine got me a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I am interested in getting sort of back into philosophy. There's a few new books that I really want to read on Nietzsche and Marx and the existentialists. I might reread the Communist Manifesto in an absolutely baffling handwritten copy that a friend made for me. That is easily the most ridiculous gift I've ever gotten, and I love it. And then I have some more revolutionary literature behind me that I'm pretty excited about, particularly reading Malcolm X's biography. I want to get a handle on Maoism, so I got quotations by Mao Zedong. I got his little red book, and I'm interested to see whether there's synthesis that can be had coming from a Trotskyist background. Asada Shakur's autobiography that I still haven't read, and of course what I'm probably most committed to for this next year is to finish Marx's Capital and actually read volumes 2 and 3. So if I've already read Capital Volume 1, which no one does, but on top of that I've read 2 and 3, me, Lenin, Luxemburg, and David Harvey will be the only people in the world who will have actually read the whole thing. And beyond that, I have no reading goals. If I come at you and I've only read like 10 books, then I'll be happy. I want to read with more intention. I don't want to be reading for reading's sake. The big goal is really actually just to sort of figure out what the fuck I'm doing with my life for the next year, which turns out is kind of something that everyone is wrestling with because we're in a fucking plague. Although I have a sneaking suspicion that post-graduation doubt of what the fuck to do with the rest of your life is not a problem specific to me. Anyway, that's it. Go home. Stay safe. Try to find small ways in your life to inconvenience the employers and other parasitic exploiters in your life. And if I could give you a hug, you know I would. I had kind of a great year. I mean, huge amounts of it really fucking sucked. And a lot of it was like kind of despite like the background radiation of like what the world is. But I hope that you have a wonderful 2022. I hope you find personal success, fulfillment in your life. And I hope you don't waste opportunities that present themselves to you. Carpe rectum. And if you don't end up having a good year, because I mean, like none of that shit's guaranteed, then have fucking great day. I feel like there's like a little bit of pressure to end on a sort of emotionally resonant note. But I'm not gonna. I'm gonna get a fucking sandwich.